Before we start with comparative politics, what is paper 2 all about? We have two parts in paper 2. One is part A, which is comparative politics and the theory of international relations. And the second is part B, which is the India and world part. See, when we have to look at this paper 2, uh, you need to understand that we are going to have different kinds of discussions now around paper 2. The discussions when it comes to comparative politics, they are largely static in nature, largely static, but there are number of themes which we have to study. Uh, what exactly is comparative politics? What are the major approaches which are used? What's the subject matter? What are the limitations? So few things which are written very explicitly in the syllabus. We have to cover it. Lately, what we have seen is UPSC has been asking some questions which are not per se written directly in the syllabus from this topic. So I'll be covering those topics also with you, and that includes some new approaches. They are modern approaches also only, but they are not explicitly mentioned in the syllabus. So we'll be covering that also. Then comparative politics will take us to the topics of how state varies between the developed world as well as the developing world, and how the entire political processes they vary. Uh, in that we have political parties, we have pressure groups, we have social movements. Some topics which we have already done as a part of our Indian government and politics part. Here we will be understanding them from a global perspective, not from the Indian perspective. So you'll be able to relate. But yes, I want to compare how the parliamentary form of government in UK differs from the parliamentary form of government in India. Uh, the systems are same. They also have parliamentary form of government. We also have, but the working of the system varies, and that is what we really want to know. That why is this the case? Comparative politics helps me do such kind of analysis. So I have topics in comparative politics which are about the various kinds of approaches which we adopt for comparison. These are called as traditional approaches or modern approaches. We want to understand how the state, political parties, pressure groups, social movements, how they vary when it comes to developed and the developing world. What's the variation? Okay, we would want to know this as a part of our comparative politics theme. Then, how globalization has happened. In the past, approximately 40 odd years, the way in which globalization has happened has tremendously changed because of the information and communication technology. And how do we have to look at this process of globalization? Some theoretical frameworks around globalization, what globalization is, why it happened, what are the theoretical perspectives, the liberal perspective, realist perspective, Marxist perspective, to understand why we have free flow of labor or free flow of capital, or we have greater interconnections between the world. What's the reason for that? So we would want to know the trends, the reasons for globalization. And now lately we have started talking about deglobalization also. In 2025 PSIR paper, there is a question on deglobalization. So why are we now talking about deglobalization? Deglobalization is more like protectionism, and the world is moving towards more and more protectionist policy, and the world is giving up on the greater interdependence and the greater connections which we have built over the past approximately 30, 40 odd years. We are seeing some backlash. Why this is happening? What's the viewpoint of developed world? How developing countries are reacting? How US is reacting? How China is reacting? So we would want to know this. Uh, Largely, this is the part where the comparative politics part ends. Okay. In your syllabus, I would say the syllabus pointer 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is where the comparative politics part will end, and it will include largely discussion around these topics. After this starts the theory of international relations. When it comes to the theory of international relations, now we need to develop some more conceptual framework as to why nation states interact with each other, how they interact with each other, why they go to war with each other, and what are the patterns of cooperation and conflict in the world. I want to look at all these developments from a theoretical perspective. Cooperation होती क्यों है, competition होता क्यों है, how do feminists look at international politics. So here I have some theories which I need to understand, some conceptual frameworks. Liberal framework, realist framework, Marxist framework, systems framework, functionalist framework. We have these kinds of frameworks. These frameworks, they use concepts like national interest, power, collective security, deterrence. We would want to know what are these concepts also. This is a part of theory of international relations. Once we know the theoretical foundations as to why and how nations interact with each other, along with some concepts like this, then we would want to put it into practice, and we would want to understand how this has been put to practical use since approximately last 80 odd years, which is since the end of Second World War till today. What are these frameworks? How are these frameworks, I beg your pardon, being implemented in the practical life, and what is the impact? How has the global political and the economic structures evolved over a period of time? For example, creation of IMF and World Bank is a relatively new development. It only happened after 1945. Creation of WTO is even more recent development in 1996. How do these institutions impact, and how these institutions impact the relations between nations? I would want to know. That is the practical aspect of this entire theoretical understanding which we'll have. Then, what are other contemporary global concerns which are there in the world? There is a specific topic: contemporary global concerns, human rights concern, democracy concern, nuclear proliferation concern, terrorism concern, gender justice concern. These are all global concerns. Everybody is concerned with respect to terrorism. Everybody is concerned with respect to, let's say, climate change. We would want to know what is the international stand on these matters. We have UN like agencies taking forward the agendas of environment, and we have nations interacting. They are sitting together in the conference of parties, and they are deciding how we can collectively cooperate so as to address the issue of climate change. What's the international climate diplomacy? How does it look like? What's the role of UN? What's the role of major countries like US, China, India? What are their policies? How these policies they interact with their foreign policy? To what extent they genuinely want to cooperate, and to what extent they are still pursuing their own narrow interests? We would want to make a comment on that, and we would see how the evolution has happened over the period of last, let's say, approximately 30 odd years since the Rio Summit of 1992. We would want to know that. That's a part of one of the contemporary global concerns, which is concern on environment, or the concern with respect to the changing climate. Then we have some standalone topics like ASEAN, NAFTA, European Union. We have these topics, and from these topics also we'll get to know about some specific way in which the countries come together and they undergo regionalism. Regionalism is when countries of a particular region, particular geography, they come together and they want to collaborate, and they want to have some collective benefits out of it. Across the world, regionalism is a very, very common phenomena. And again, this is also a standalone topic which is a part of this particular part. With this, the part A finishes. So what I have is, I have topics like this, and then I have theoretical foundations, concepts, and their application, and some contemporary global concerns. Okay, uh, this particular, I would say, area is quite static in nature. I would say 70% is static, 30% is dynamic, whereby when we apply the changes which are happening in the foreign policies of major countries like US, Russia, China, and what impact do they have on the entire global politics, then those kinds of questions, they become dynamic in nature. For example, now Trump is changing the way in which the global supply chains work. Trump is changing the very fundamentals of India-US relations, and Trump is also talking about nuclear weapons. So, how all these things impact a structure which we have created in the international sphere? Such kind of questions, they become dynamic and they are asked by UPSC. So, we'll look at those questions also. After completing this, then we move on to the India and world part. Here, this is where the relations between nations as well as the Indian foreign policy has to be studied. So, this part is more about how Indian foreign policy has evolved. This part is about how uh, uh, why we adopt policies like multiple alignment, why we had non-alignment, how do we look at developments in China, in US, and what is our long-term vision with respect to the entire world as well as these countries, which are the major players. Every country has some goals and objectives, and to realize those goals and objectives, every country is going to take some certain set of actions, and those actions are nothing but the foreign policy of a country. So, what are the goals of India? What are the objectives of India? For example, one of the objectives of India is that we want to be the Vishwaguru, and Vishwaguru is nothing but our conceptualization of the superpower status. China wants to be the middle kingdom in the world. It's their conceptualization of the superpower status. We have objectives. So there are countries who want power, there are countries who have ambitions, there are countries who have resources, there are countries who have legacies. They would want to compete for power, and they create their systems, their orders, their civilizations, and they compete for power. And that has been a consistent feature of human history. So Russia wants to come back and be this great power. It can't be the superpower now. It wants to be the great power. India wants to be a great power. China wants to be a superpower. USA wants to remain a superpower. So, how the politics is going to take place, how the resources are going to pit the countries against each other, how the politics around resources, how the politics around power is going to shape the relationship. We want to know all this. Why India wants to be a permanent member of UNSC. We really want to know that. All those discussions, they will come here. Here we will get into the details of India's relationship with each and every country. So with China, what has been the historical background, what are the current trends, where we are expected to go, we would want to make comments on that. With respect to Pakistan, how does Operation Sindoor change India's outlook towards Pakistan, India's policy towards Pakistan? How does Donald Trump's actions in the past approximately 5 months, how do they undermine the long-standing India-US relationship which has developed in the past 25 years? We would want to make assessments of from the past so that we can make commentaries for the future, and around that we'll be building our arguments. So we really want to know how this happens. This will come in the India and the world part. Okay, now after talking briefly about what does paper 2 include for you, let me now start with the topic for today, which is the comparative politics. Now when it comes to comparative politics, the discipline, first of all, comparative politics is a sub discipline of political science itself. Political science has been traditionally studied as political philosophy or simply as philosophy. When we made a distinguishing when we distinguished between political philosophy and political science, and under the political science, we have some sub disciplines in which comparative politics comes. So, look, when we talk about political science, we have already done that political science is trying to understand the politics in a systematic manner, not necessarily scientific manner, but in a systematic manner. That is what political science intends to do. And it deals with everything that happens at the level of the institution of state. Okay. Now we have this triangle of ours. So political science, PubAd, we have already discussed this. These are disciplines which study the institution of state and the dynamics around state. So in our studies, we see what the state should look like, whether the state is an instrument of bourgeois, as Karl Marx would say, or whether state is the march of God on earth, as Hegel would say, or whether state is an ethical institution which has to ensure a virtuous life, something which Aristotle, Plato would say. We have different theories of state, we have different notions around the origin of state, we have different notions around the nature of state. All of this theoretical framework we have already done. Now, what we want to do primarily is we want to compare states. And not only states, we actually want to compare politics. And why do we want to do that? Look, the simple idea is for the purpose of inquiry, for the purpose of research, to make our understanding better about why things happen the way they happen. Now, if you remember, we have talked about how Aristotle, who is called as the father of political science, and he is also somebody who has given us those concepts which we use in present times. He is the one who, in his theory of revolution and in his theory of constitution, is going for analysis of close to 158 constitutions which were prevalent during that time. When Aristotle is comparing the various constitutions or the governments or the systems, I'm using them interchangeably, uh, present during that time, I'm talking about the ancient Greece. When he's talking, when he's analyzing them, then at this point of time, what Aristotle is doing is Aristotle is indulging into the study of comparative government. I'm not using the word politics here, I'm using the word government here. Comparative government or comparative constitution or comparative system. So Aristotle, who is the father of political science, is also called as the father of comparative politics because he is the one who for the first time is trying to understand which political system is better. He is trying to understand what are the causes of revolution, and for that what he is doing is he's comparing the systems. Why some systems are more stable, why the revolutions happen, what are the causes of revolution, what are the general causes, what are the particular causes. We have done all those things. What's the conception of justice? When there is a sense of injustice, there will be revolution. So when Aristotle is making all these, when Aristotle is trying to understand all this, he is basically looking at things from the perspective of a systematic way of study called as comparative politics, called as comparative, sorry, government. So from there we see that comparisons is integral to understanding our uh, viewpoint around politics, around public life, around political life. And that is what happened. Now, comparative government, I beg your pardon, has been there since the time of Aristotle, and many thinkers, they have utilized comparisons so as to understand the prevailing systems and to provide suggestions as a part of their theories. What we are majorly concerned with is that how this entire comparative governments, which were being compared from the times of Aristotle up till very recently, till the Second World War, how they were nothing but the study of Europe. So whenever I talk about comparative government, I'm talking essentially about comparisons which are being done in Europe. They are not comparing the systems of Europe with the systems, let's say, which were prevailing in the East. No. China has their own system, Mongolia had their own system, India had its own system. They are not comparing those systems with the systems which are prevalent back there. What they were doing were they were largely looking at the systems prevalent in Europe, and that is what they were doing. But now, after Second World War, we have a very important development, which is decolonization, and the newly independent countries, they are devising their own system. They may be copying some system from the Europe, and now we need to have a more scientific understanding of why things happen the way they happen in East, and we already have a huge analysis of why things happen the way they happen in Europe. So what I need is, I need a tool to compare those regions, and in my comparison I want to include those regions. So what do? I have to go for comparisons. But the problem is, the way in which politics happens in India and the way in which politics happens in UK or US is very different. So what I need to do is, I cannot be satisfied only with comparing systems, comparing constitutions, comparing governments. I'll have to dig deeper into those elements which are not necessarily a part of the state. Maybe I have to go and try to see the linkages which are prevalent between state and society. Why? Because in India, one institution of society which is called as caste, it greatly impacts politics. Does the same institution, first of all, exist in the West? May not. Okay, if caste does not exist, let's say class will exist. How much is the class impacting politics? If I want to study that, I will have to move away from state and take my analysis here also, and that is when I'll be able to better understand the situation. And the moment I do this, that I take my analysis from the institution of state and I start including other parameters into my study which may belong to the institution of society. So, for example, if I start taking into consideration the role of caste, the role of religion, the role of family, the role of attitude, the role of, let's say, norms, values which are existing in the society, and then I try to understand politics, my understanding would be much more holistic. And I would be actually able to compare, because the political culture in Britain is much, much more mature than the political culture in India. We don't have we can't say our people understand secular politics to a great extent. They're people, they understand because they have traveled that path, and the society is an industrial secular society. Ours is not a industrial secular society, it's still a traditional society. So traditional society, but the institution of state, the parliamentary democracy, this is modern institution, this is traditional institution. And can I relate it to the fact that in politics you have modern institution, in society you have traditional, or the traditional values are still, uh, let's say, ongoing, versus you have a modern system in Britain and the society is also largely modern. So how to compare this? So this is where we need to broaden our analysis, and this is where my subdiscipline of comparative politics comes into picture. The moment I make a transition from comparative government to comparative politics, what I have basically done is, here I was either studying state, within state what I was studying executive, legislature, judiciary. I was studying this, or I was studying simply the constitutions, or the larger emphasis was on, let's try to understand the philosophy of things. This is how I used to do my comparisons earlier. But now what we said, okay, we have to do this analysis at the level of state, and again, we'll do the analysis of executive, legislature, judiciary. But I also have to understand all the political processes which don't happen in the institution of state, which may be happening in the institution of society. So, how do pressure groups operate? Why do people go for social movements? What is the role of elites in the society? The moment I go for these kinds of studies, this is where I say I am not only restricting myself to the study of state, but I am including other parameters also into my study. And this is where my domain trans transitions from comparative government to comparative politics, because politics is a much more or a much broader domain as compared to government. Government is one part of the politics. Our politics, it happens in society, and there are so many things which impact politics: race, religion, caste, gender, development. We have talked about determinants of voting behavior. Number of things impact elections in India. Politics, our actions, the state's actions, they are done by taking into consideration caste equations. They are done by taking into consideration religious equations. So politics is a much bigger domain. And I want to compare politics. I don't want to compare only governments. What I have been doing up till Second World War was I was comparing governments. And when I say governments, we were comparing the institutions of the state, we were comparing constitutions. Now let's bring more parameters. How do actors behave? Behavior, political behavior. So we will study what were the value systems which influenced Nehru. What value systems influence Indira Gandhi? What value systems are influencing Prime Minister Modi? Because this also tells me the behavior of a political actor, and this is also important. Here, we will not worry about this. We would worry about structures. Here, we worry about actors also. Okay. So, this is just an introduction to how we have transitioned from comparative governments to comparative politics. And this discipline, which is our major area of study, this has emerged only after Second World War. And when it emerged in the Second World War, there were many new approaches which were developed to understand better how the decolonized world works and how various developments which are going on in the world, how we have to understand that. So, before we move forward, the summary of the discussion is that we need a tool to compare. So they said we already have a tool. You compare the executive, legislative, and judicial wings of UK with US, you will know how things work in those two countries. But they said no. Now we have a problem. We have another world coming up altogether, and this world is not necessarily democratic. In this world, you have military dictatorships. In this world, you have guided democracies. In this world, the politics happens in a very different manner. So, how to then compare? And only after comparing, we'll be able to understand why things are happening the way they are happening, and maybe we'll be able to give some policy level recommendations. So the comparative politics as a discipline grew within political science as a discipline. Okay. Now, when it is growing, at this point of time, we make a comparison between the traditional approaches and the modern approaches. We have two different approaches to study comparative politics. The word comparative politics will be used loosely. However, it is more relevant only after Second World War. So I have traditional approaches, I have modern approaches. Traditional approaches, I have philosophical approach, I have historical approach, I have institutional approach, I have legal approach. Sometimes legal institutional are mentioned together. These are the four approaches which were primarily used while comparing systems before Second World War. Okay. Philosophical approach simply is going to make a philosophical inquiry why things happen the way they are happening. It will talk about justice, equality. So thinkers like Plato, they are associated with philosophical approach. They are more interested in making philosophical inquiries, and they will make philosophical inquiries. They will study, let's say, systems, the constitution of one country, and they'll try to make philosophical inquiry out of it, and they'll try to give some suggestions out of it. So in Plato's Republic, we see analysis of monarchy also, we see analysis of democracy also, we see analysis of aristocracy also, and the same thing has been done by Aristotle also. Historical approach. Who comes to your mind when we talk about historical approach? Who will tell me? Who is one thinker who has deployed historical approach? I want you to participate and tell me who is that one thinker who has used historical approach as a part of his theory. Uh, Using history to provide your own theory, using historical analysis as a part of your theory, using history to support your arguments. Uh, Comparisons can be done by looking at the histories of various countries and then drawing some generalized conclusions. I look at the history of Athens, I look at the history of Sparta. I try to make some generalized statements. I look at the history of Roman Empire and I try to make a generalized statement that the Roman Empire valued freedom. Roman Empire valued democracy. Roman Empire valued discussions. I'm making these generalizations after studying the history of Roman Empire. Okay, very good. It is Machiavelli. Machiavelli is known as the most important person who has deployed the historical approach to give his suggestions in his book. And what is the name of the Machiavelli's most important work? There are two works of Machiavelli. Which one is more important? You tell me. So I have historical approach, institutional approach, study of executive, legislature, and judiciary. Very simple. Here you study how the executive wings of countries work, how the legislative wings work, how the judicial wings work. So you try to understand the rules and regulations uh, which are influencing these institutions. Then the legal approach, it basically studies constitutions or in general laws, and it looks at the functioning of these institutions as a byproduct of what is the law there. Okay, that is how the this approach works. uh, the legal approach. So philosophical approach, philosophical inquiries, historical approach, using history. Who has used history? Karl Marx has also used history. Who has used history? Hegel has also used history. Machiavelli has also used history. Okay, and the name of the book of Machiavelli, the most important work, is The Prince. Institutional approach, executive, legislative, judicial wings, they are being compared. So how do they compare? They look at the functioning of them. That what are the rules which are binding the legislature? Are there any limitations on the judiciary? For example, Indian judiciary is very strong. The judiciary in UK is not that strong. Indian judiciary uh, can strike down a constitutional amendment. In UK, this cannot happen because there's no such concept like this. So we have the working of institutions. The legal approach will say the working of institutions is basically the result of the law of the land, the constitution, how the rule of law is getting implemented, what is the importance of the legal framework in that particular country. If you look at the legal framework, you will realize that they are able to become stronger because the constitution allows for so. And here I'll take you to the discussion on the constitutional supremacy in India versus the parliamentary sovereignty in UK. The constitutional supremacy in India makes judiciary stronger because judiciary, who is the guardian of the constitution, has to ensure that the that whatever is written in the constitution, that should be abided by, and you cannot make wholesale changes to the constitution of India to the extent that you change the very nature of the constitution. No, you can't do that. They created something called basic structure doctrine for that. They are able to do that because there is a written constitution. They are able to do that because the written constitution is supreme in nature. Had there not been a written constitution which was supreme, the judiciary would not have been able to do this. So the legal approach will say the presence of the constitution, the presence of a written constitution, the supremacy of that constitution has in has has resulted in a stronger judiciary. In case of UK, you don't have a written constitution. The judiciary cannot take such actions. So the legal approach is saying, let's study this. We will get to know what they are doing. That's what the legal approach is all about. These all approaches, they have been used in the history. We don't have to study them in detail. We already know them from our analysis of paper 1. However, because these approaches, they were criticized that they lack somewhere or the other, there was a need to go for something new, and that is where the modern approaches comes into picture. And this is where most of the questions will be asked from. Modern approaches, systems approach, David Easton. Behavioral approach, structural functional approach, political sociology approach, political economy approach. These are ones which are explicitly written in your syllabus. This one, this one, this one. This is not written per se, but this is also one approach, modern approach. In addition to that, we have other approaches: political culture approach, political socialization approach. Then you have और कौन सी अप्रोच है पॉलिटिकल डेवलपमेंट अप्रोच ये भी मॉडर्न अप्रोचेज हैं इसके बाद इकोनॉमिक अप्रोच साइकोलॉजिकल अप्रोच simulation approach. These are some of the approaches which I have not been teaching earlier, but now looking at the UPSC questions, we will try to understand these approaches also. Okay, although if I talk about your syllabus, only these are mentioned: systems, structural functional, political sociology, and political economy. But the remaining are also modern approaches, and they also try to help us with understanding things. Okay, now what we have been doing is we have been using the traditional approaches to compare the governments. Now, why these traditional approaches are a problem, why we have to make a transition from here to here, this is what is the next theme for us: the limitations of traditional approaches. Now, traditional approaches have been criticized, especially by R.C. Macridus. Look, there are a lot of people who have criticized traditional approaches, but the work of R.C. Macridus is considered to be most important. So, to get good marks, you should know which person, which scholar is associated with which major work, and that is what will make our answers stand out from the others if you write from that perspective. Okay, don't worry, everything is included. What I have been doing is I have already started preparing this PDF for you, and whatever I'm teaching, everything is right here, and I'll ensure that all These aspects are included here along with the tables, along with some very easy to understand examples which I'm putting here, because I know this topic is a little difficult for everyone. So I have been working since the last 2 days on creating this PDF, and this is a work in progress still. I'll be sharing it with you. So what I have done this time is I have included some illustrations also for you to understand it better. And we'll do this entire comparative politics in a very thorough manner, so that whatever uh, difficult questions which are coming in the examination, we are able to attempt them much better. Okay, so it will take us a good 3 4 days to, not 3 4 days, I think it will take us a week to complete the comparative politics part, but yeah, we'll do it. So coming to the limitations of traditional approaches, I don't know how or how you are planning your studies, but as I have mentioned in the group, whatever parts are left, now you keep them for Saturday and Sundays, maybe only Sundays, if you can, include them in your tight schedule. uh, I would want you, those attempting in 2026, I would want you that yes, you should uh, only give 50% of the time to optionals now, but give 50%, don't give 60% of the time, give 50%, not a problem. Give 50% of the time to options, give 50% of the time to your prelims preparation, and maybe after December, uh, you can bring down this time to 20% and 80% to prelims. And by the end of January, you can leave your optional altogether, and then you can move on only with the prelims. Again, this may vary from person to person. I am not suggesting that this is a uniform framework for everyone, but I would want you to at least do your optionals till the end of December, and invest in them heavily. And you don't have to do anything additional. Whatever is being discussed in the class, whatever the handouts are being given to you, and we'll be starting with a rigorous AWS. Every week we'll have an AWS, and we'll write answers from the questions which are discussed here itself, so that you don't have to, you feel a sense of completion. And I would demand that you come for the classes daily. Okay, I'll be having some, uh, either we'll be having a class of a longer duration, or I'll want to have multiple classes in a single day. Maybe we can have one class at the normal time, and maybe we can have 1 hour of class towards the end of the day, 8 to 9 or 9 to 10. Say it's flexible framework for me, depending on how you guys are available, so that we can push a little bit. And I would want you to push. I'll also push, so that these coming 1.5 months, this is, let's make this highly productive for us. Okay, so that's it. Coming back, so limitations of traditional approaches. RC Macridus, uh, what is he saying? He is criticizing these approaches. Why is he criticizing this approach? Because he is writing in 1950s, and he's saying 1950s, why are you all still deploying these approaches, philosophical, historical, legal, and institutional? Because these approaches are not going to reveal the reality to us. What is the reality? The reality is a new world has come up altogether. Only this is not the reality. A new philosophy altogether has come up, which is challenging things. That was the philosophy of communism. So why are countries adopting communism, and how is the communist countries functioning? What are the parameters for capturing power in developing country? How are the leaders there? Even if they are authoritative, how are they able to sustain power? How are they able to ensure that people don't revolt against them? We need to understand all these things, because if you become outrightly authoritarian in a developed world which knows about rights, which knows about its let's say entitlements, they are going to revolt. There is free press also, they are going to revolt also. But same things are not happening in the developing world. So what is going on there? How should we understand their politics? And more importantly, this is the time when an entire movement of behavioralism has also eclipsed political science. Behavioralism is saying let's make our theories more scientific in nature. And to make things more scientific in nature, we have to be value neutral. हमें वैल्यू जजमेंट्स नहीं देनी है, वैल्यू न्यूट्रल रहना है और कुछ ऐसे फ्रेमवर्क्स बनाने हैं, सिस्टम बनाने हैं जो यूनिवर्सली हर जगह लग जाए. So let's get into that. This is the time period after the Second World War when these communism has come up. Developing countries or the decolonized world, the developing and underdeveloped world, they have come up. And then you have this entire intellectual movement going on within the political science as a discipline also. तो करेंगे आप, तो इस सब में कुछ नया करना है. वो नया क्या है? वो नई अप्रोचेस है. बट बिफोर दैट, why are these approaches problematic or what are the limitations? Obviously these approaches have helped us, but these approaches also have some limitations because of which the new approaches are being devised. R.C. Macridus, in his celebrated work The Study of Comparative Government, he says traditional approaches are non-comparative, formalistic, descriptive and parochial. Four words which he used, we'll want to understand these four words. He says traditional approaches are non-comparative, they are formalistic, uh, they are descriptive and parochial. Okay, so there is a problem. Non-comparative, what he means by non-comparative, he says whatever studies were being done, they were actually not comparative. Why is he saying so? He says that when we look at comparative governments, we have seen that traditional studies, they were generally the case studies of single countries like UK, France or US with little to no actual comparison. They would describe the political system of different countries in isolation, place them side by side, but don't engage in systematic integrated analysis to identify similarities, differences and causal relationships. Non-comparative here means countries, they are studied and put side by side. You are actually not going into deeper analysis and trying to understand the causal relationship of why something happens the way it happens. इसको बोलते हैं causal relationship. What is happening? Countries are studied. Which countries are being studied? Only Western countries. So can it be called as comparative in true sense because there is no study of the Eastern world or the non-Western world? That is also problematic. Otherwise, individual case studies, after studying, they are put side by side. No causal relationship is being discussed. As a result of which, you studied US, you studied UK, you studied, let's say, France, study 1, study 2, study 3. That is what you're doing. This is not comparison. This is individual studies and you put it side by side and you left it to the reader that you do the analytical part. You understand the causal relationship. So in USA, in the presidential election, the primaries are very important and the funding is very important. In India, the funding do plays a role, but the equivalent of primaries and the equivalent of campaigning may not necessarily have an impact because there they have a huge impact. That's the causal relationship. Why some things they are important in some countries and why the same things may not be important in other countries. He's saying they are non-comparative. He's saying they are formalistic. These approaches, They are studying the formal institutions of government, legislature, executive, judiciary, bureaucracy, and the legal rules. So the legal rules and the study of these institutions, can I say it is institutional and legal approaches? Both these are excessively formalistic. The legalism and formalism neglected crucial informal factors. What are crucial informal factors? Crucial informal factors include political parties, the study of political parties, the study of interest groups. What is the political culture of a country? What is the social class? What are the voting behavior? Now, if you remember, in the Indian government and politics part, we have said that voting behavior is a part of the recent studies. They're not a part of previous approaches. For example, the formalistic study would discuss the powers of the US president outlined in the constitution, but ignore the influence of media or party caucus on those powers. So you are not understanding how the media, how the party caucus, how the party system, how the interest groups, how they are impacting the functions or the powers or the decisions of the president of the United States. If you're not doing that, your study is incomplete, formalistic. Okay, no emphasis on informal structures. Which informal structures? You can mention few. Study of political parties, pressure groups and interest groups, one and the same thing. Okay. Although later on I'll tell you the nuances between them. एक क्वेश्चन आ गया था प्रेशर ग्रुप को इंटरेस्ट ग्रुप के साथ डिस्टिंग्विश करो. फॉर ऑल प्रैक्टिकल पर्पसेस हम सेम मान के चलते हैं, बट कंपैरेटिव पॉलिटिक्स में थोड़ा सा डिफरेंस आ जाता है. इट्स हाईली हाईली एकेडमिक. स्टडी ऑफ पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज, प्रेशर ग्रुप्स, political culture, okay, voting behaviors or voting behavior and voting patterns. These are all informal. They are not studied. Formalistic. Then the third is they are only descriptive in nature. The focus was on description and classification of institutions rather than on analysis and explanation. How to understand this? Stay with me. Scholars were concerned with documenting what is rather than investigating why certain political phenomena occur and what are the causes of the political change or what the causes of the political change might be. So, what I am trying to do is I am trying to understand again what does the system look like. The why of the system is not being discussed. This part has a relation with this because if you put countries side by side and you don't study the causal relationship, you are not truly comparative. And at the same time, you are merely descriptive, you are not at all analytical. The focus is on what is instead of why. And lastly, these approaches they have been called as parochial. He uses the word parochial. Parochial here means ethnocentric or Eurocentric. The study was overwhelmingly parochial or narrow in scope, which focused almost exclusively on the political systems of Western Europe and North America. The consequence was that this Eurocentrism led to the neglect of a vast majority of world's political systems, particularly the newly independent nations of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, as a result of which our study again is not actually truly comparative. Because it is non-comparative, it is also parochial. Because it is non-comparative, it ends up being descriptive instead of being analytical. And formalistic is separate altogether. So parochial, narrow in focus, narrow in scope, no inclusion of non-Western world. Okay. Now the difference between parochial and non-comparative is, here whatever is being compared, it is actually not being compared, it is just being studied and put side by side. So not truly comparative. Here another element is being said, that your comparisons are only of the Western world. Your comparisons do not include the non-Western world. So that is why your entire study is narrow in scope, not parochial in scope. Okay. Any doubts at this point of time? Because there is a overlap in this idea, this idea, this idea, this idea. He uses four words to criticize the traditional approaches. Traditional approaches are non-comparative, formalistic, descriptive, and parochial, as a result of which we have to let go of them and we have to come to new approaches. Okay. So after the limitations of traditional approaches, very quickly, let's revise. We have as of now said that comparative governments, the study of governments, the comparison between governments, it is called as comparative government. And after Second World War, we have made a transition from comparative governments to comparative politics, whereby we have included various other aspects which impacts politics, not only the study of state. Then we said that the way comparative politics has been studied is via two approaches. One is the traditional approach, which includes philosophical, historical, institutional, and legal. They have their own benefits, but they have their own limitations. Because of the broader limitations of these all traditional approaches, which is that they are non-comparative, they are formalistic, they are descriptive, they are parochial, what we have done is we have shifted towards traditional modern approaches. And through these modern approaches, now we intend to look at things in a much more scientific manner, in a much more comparative manner, in a much more broad manner, in a analytical manner. That is what we intend to do. Okay. If tomorrow a question comes on limitations of traditional approaches, obviously you will be mentioning this from the perspective of R.C. Macridus. If the question comes, what are the features of modern approaches, इसको उल्टा कर देना, क्योंकि मॉडर्न अप्रोचेस क्या होंगी, ट्रूली कंपैरेटिव होंगी. मॉडर्न अप्रोचेस फॉर्मलिस्टिक नहीं होंगी, इनफॉर्मल मैकेनिज्म्स को भी इंक्लूड करेंगी. मॉडर्न अप्रोचेस डिस्क्रिप्टिव होने के साथ साथ एनालिटिकल होंगी, और मॉडर्न अप्रोचेस पेरोकियल या नैरो नहीं होंगी, ब्रॉड होंगी स्कोप. आई होप दिस इज क्लियर. व्हेनेवर आई एम टेलिंग यू समथिंग लाइक दिस, साइड पे लिख लिया करो, ठीक है. तो लिमिटेशन भी हो गई हमारी, अगर फीचर्स ऑफ मॉडर्न अप्रोचेस आ गए वो भी हो गया हमारा. एंड वी हैव सीन द डिफरेंसेस बिटवीन both and we have seen the transition. Now let's try to understand the first modern approach, which is the systems approach. Any doubts at this point of time? Feel free to ask me. No doubts? Nothing? डाउट ही नहीं आते तुमको? कैसे लोग हो तुम? डाउट ही नहीं आते तुम्हें? पढ़ाई वढ़ाई कर रहे हो? चलो सिस्टम्स अप्रोच पे आते हैं. सिस्टम अप्रोच गिवन बाय डेविड ईस्टन. So as of now we have studied, we have today introduced in our discussion R.C. Macridus, known for telling us the limitations of traditional approaches. ये भी साइड में साथ साथ लिख के चलते चला करो, ठीक है, साइड में कहीं पर भी लिख लिया करो. We have also said Aristotle, who is the father of comparative politics. Okay. And third, we are saying David Easton, who is introducing systems approach, also called as the general systems theory. Okay. The general systems theory, this particular approach, a new kind of approach. Okay. System. I don't know. Do we have anyone from medical background? System. The concept of system is integral to biology. Uh, why? Uh, in biology, you have the concept of digestive system. You have the concept of respiratory system. You have the concept of other systems, excretory system. ठीक है, जितने भी system होते हैं. You define a system. Okay, there's a digestive system, and then you have organs, and you have a working of this entire digestive system, and this digestive system interacts with other systems. Okay, so what we have is we have science giving us the concept of system, which is incorporated in bio, and then the concept of system is being included into disciplines like economics, sociology, and anthropology. The students of these subjects, they also use the concept of system to understand things. For example, social system. Okay, Karl Marx has used the concept of movement of history, and he has applied it to various systems in the world. One was the feudal system, one was master slave system. You call it master slave system, you call it master slave society, one and the same thing. Now the same approach of systems is being included in political science also. So first of all, systems approach is reflective of a multi interdisciplinary connection, where political science, which has generally been associated with disciplines like philosophy, history, law, and you can relate it to the traditional approaches. Traditionally, political science has been studied in connection with these disciplines of philosophy, history, and law. But now, after the Second World War, under the forces of behavioral revolution, the idea is that we should borrow from new disciplines. And the study of political science was earlier also interdisciplinary, where philosophy, law, and history added to our understanding. But now we want to change the disciplines. Let's not take suggestions and let's not take ideas from those disciplines. Let's take from new disciplines, and new disciplines are economics, sociology, anthropology. And there, a lot of study is being done by taking inspiration from science, especially biology, the concept of system. And now David Easton is saying, let me apply it to political science also. That's the context of the approach of the systems approach. तो एक सिस्टम आने वाला है, एक डेफिनेशन आने वाली है, ओके, एक कॉन्सेप्ट आने वाला है, वेयर बाय आई एम गोइंग टू से that there is something called a system, and this system, I'll be calling this system as a political system. So what is this political system? David Easton says that in this political system, I am trying to devise a framework which is scientific and which is universal, can be applied anywhere. You can apply this to India, you can apply this to US, you can apply this to UK, you can apply this to Kenya, you can apply this to African countries, you can apply this anywhere. Why do you want to do that? Because he's saying, what I want to do is, I want to create a theory in which I can compare systems, and I want to create this theory in a very scientific manner. There should be no criticism that I am favoring the liberal world or I am favoring the socialist world, I am favoring the developed or the developing. No. Why? Because science does not do that. What does science do? Science is going to take care of things in a impartial or a neutral manner. For example, F is equal to ma. It is applicable एवरीवेयर, यूएस में भी एप्लीकेबल, इंडिया में भी है, यूके में भी है. कहीं पर चेंज तो नहीं हो जाता ना कि फोर्स इज इक्वल टू मास इनटू एक्सेलरेशन. नो, the idea that there is gravity and it impacts everyone, it's true, no matter where you are. I, who is I? David Easton. He says, let's create such a model in PSIR where we can compare the countries, their way of doing politics. And for that, he takes the concept of system, and in this system, he says, Ruko. He takes the example of a system in which he says that I have a system called as political system. I have another system which is called as economic system. I have another system which is called as social system. So, long story short, you can simply think that political system is where politics happens, economic system is where economics happens, social system is where, let's say, the society functions, and you can also have something called as international system. Now, every system comes with a boundary. There's a concept of boundary. So, concept of boundary is like I want to distinguish this system from this system. So, my political system has a boundary. That means if I talk about allocation of resources, किसको क्या मिलेगा, जिसको हम क्या बोलते हैं, डिस्ट्रीब्यूटिव जस्टिस भी बोलते हैं. किसको क्या मिलेगा, तुमको कितनी नौकरी मिलेगी, रिजर्वेशन होगी या नहीं. Distributive justice is something which happens in the political system. It does not happen in economic system. Caste system operates here. Caste system does not operate here. Okay. Demand and supply happens here. It does not happen here. So I have different systems. International politics happens here. It does not happen here. I want to define a system. Okay, just like digestive system, just like respiratory system. Now, once I have defined the system, political system, this political system has a boundary which separates it from other systems. So as you can see, every system has their own boundary. These systems, they are separated from other systems. However, they can interact with them. For example, economy is going to impact politics, society is going to impact politics. They can interact, but otherwise they have a boundary. David Easton says that this political system has some inputs and some outputs, and he says that there is a feedback mechanism also. So sorry. What happens is that he is trying to create a system in which he is telling us how you have to look at things in an impartial, scientific manner. He says you go to any country, you will find that this political system is going to play a role which is authoritative allocation of resources. Of resources, of values, of norms, whatever be the case. Resources is distributive justice. Okay? Every year there is close to 1000 vacancies for civil services examination, and then they will be filled after the process is undertaken by UPSC. What is that? That's a resource. That's a job. Okay, job is being offered. Job is a resource. Who is deciding how many jobs will be distributed this particular year? Who is saying that in the UPSC notification there will be 1000 vacancies, not 1200 vacancies? The political system decides that. So political system is doing what? It is authoritative allocation. Authoritative, why? It is binding on everyone. It is going to allocate resources. It is going to tell us which norms, which values are allowed. It is going to tell us which norms, which values are not allowed. For example, as per the constitution, which is something which is a result of, let's say, political system. Political system has decided that will be a constitution. Now the constitution is telling us you can indulge in free speech, but wait a minute. The moment you try to defame someone else, you will be stopped. That means freedom of speech and expression does not include you defaming someone. That is where we are making, in an authoritative manner, telling you where your freedom of speech and expression ends. You can have laws, laws which penalize people for, let's say, uh, either expressing themselves via speech, via actions, uh, whereby they may end up, let's say, they end up being insensitive to the concerns of, to the religious concerns of people. Let's say blasphemy laws होते हैं जैसे, ठीक है, आपने ऐसे कैसे बोल दिया, तो religious blasphemy is a very very common thing in many countries. That is authoritative way in which you are being told what kind of speech, what kind of actions, what kind of values you can have and what kind of values you can't have. Who is telling? Political system. Political system of Saudi Arabia, UK, USA, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, North Korea. Everybody is going to do this task of authoritative allocation. So this is my political system. How does this political system look like? Executive, legislature, judiciary. We are not interested whether executive is more powerful, judiciary is more powerful, legislature is more powerful. We are not interested in that as of now, because what we want to do is we want to make a dispassionate, disinterested study that there is this system which can be applied across the world. Because what is David Easton doing? He's trying to devise a universal method which is scientific in nature, through which we can compare all the countries of the world. So wherever you go, he says, you will have inputs. There will be some inputs, there will be some outputs, there will be a feedback mechanism. The feedback is intended to provide what are problems. Wherever the problems are there, the problems will be taken care of. And after the problems are taken care of, what the political system will do, it will continue to operate. Because if I don't have the feedback loop, the outputs which are created by this political system, for example, one output is, let's say, see, outputs are nothing but policies. So whatever policies are made, whatever laws are made, they are nothing but outputs. And as a part of our policy, let's say we have that some seats will be filled by merit in UPSC, some seats will be filled on the basis of social justice, and thereby we will have something called reservations. So we will have both the things. This is a policy. Now, the people will tell whether these things are right or wrong, and that is why there is a feedback also. Once the feedback reaches back, now the inputs will be changed. Why? So that the political system can function in a stable manner. Whether it is democracy, whether it is any authoritative country, all of them are going to make laws. Okay. All of them are going to make some laws. Saudi Arabia is going to make some laws, US is going to make some laws, India is going to make some laws. We will make some laws depending on some support which is provided to us by the people. They are called as inputs. In David Easton's terminology, what are inputs? Inputs are the support mechanisms through which the system actually is able to operate. Then the system will indulge into authoritative allocation and the system will produce something called as outputs. Is this something like a machine? Input, output, feedback is to ensure that the system machine keeps on functioning well. This is the scientific way of understanding comparative politics done by David Easton. Now, we'll discuss more about this, but the crux of the matter is my political system is a machine which has inputs, which has outputs. This political system at the end of the day is going to produce some outputs which are generally same for every country, because every country will end up creating policies, will end up creating laws through which they will run their country. In every country, there will be some demands by the people which are nothing but the inputs. He says how to understand inputs. Inputs are nothing but the demands of the people. What is the demand of the people? Demand of the people is road, रोड बना दो. मैंने यहाँ से डिमांड की रोड बना दो, पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम ने उसको मशीन के अंदर गया, उसने कहा हाँ कैसे बनानी है, कॉन्ट्रैक्टर कौन होगा, कहाँ से कहाँ तक रोड बनेगी, पैसा कितना लगेगा, टोल कैसे कलेक्ट करेंगे, नितिन गडकरी जी आ गए, सब हो गया। उसके बाद एक पॉलिसी बन गई कि हाँ ये पैसा एलोकेट हुआ है, प्रधानमंत्री ग्राम सड़क योजना आ गई है, इसमें इतना पैसा है, इस तरीके से एलोकेट होगा, ब्यूरोक्रेसी में ऐसे ऐसे पैसा जाएगा, इस तरीके से टोल कलेक्ट होगा, और बन गई पॉलिसी। दिस इज द एग्जैक्ट सेम थिंग विच इज हैपनिंग इन एवरी कंट्री। सो इसी सिंपल से प्रोसेस को डेविड ईस्टन ने बहुत मुश्किल कर दिया कि एक होती है डिमांड। डिमांड इज माई इनपुट, सपोर्ट इज माई इनपुट। There are two inputs. One is the demand, general demands made by people. One is the support, that okay, I support the system, that you do good work. For that, I am paying taxes. The support is seen in the form of legitimacy for the system. Am I paying taxes? Are you paying taxes? If you are paying taxes related to legitimacy, if you are paying taxes, that means you consider the state to be legitimate. There is support for what? System. There is support for the system, there are demands which are made on the system, and the system is going to create outputs in the form of laws, policies, etc. And the system is very smart, the machine is very smart. It is also going to have a feedback mechanism. Whenever some demands and supports are changing, the system is going to reconfigure itself and is going to come up with new policy so that the system stays stable. That is systems approach to comparative politics. Any doubts at this point of time? Feel free to ask me. जल्दी से पूछ लो. Now this system is very smart system. Okay, the system has boundaries. The system has uh, a way in which it is going to sustain itself. A system is going to regulate itself also. Tell me one thing. If I have something like this, and let's bring Marxism into equation. What is the main idea of Marxism? Tell me. What is the main idea of Marxism? जल्दी जल्दी बताओ. Let's try to understand this. What is the main idea of Marxism? Who will tell me the main idea of Marxism? What is the main concern of Marxists? What is the main objective of Marxists? What do you know about Marxism in general? I'm not talking about Karl Marx, Gramsci, Lenin. No, in general. Very broad, at the very broad level, what does Marxism say? What's the main idea of Marxism? What do Marxists want as a study, as a part of the discipline? Marxism is a discipline, it's ideology, it's a way in which you look at the world. It talks about base superstructure. Okay, what else? What else? जल्दी बताओ, इतना टाइम थोड़ा ना है. इतना इतना टाइम लोगे तो कैसे चलेगा. जल्दी 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 जल्दी. What do you know about Marxism? Tell me. What does Marxist say? Except the base superstructure, what is the main concern of Marxists? Chat GPT तो नहीं करने लग गए? What is the main concern of Marxists? Is that what you're doing? Okay, who all are in the class? Krishna Teja Reddy. I'm happy to see you. You're coming for the classes now. It's a good thing. Nandini is in the class. Who else is in the class today? Uh, where is Shiv these days? Where is Satyam these days? Ritika is there. The working class will revolt and become the ruling class. Okay, so do they say the working class will become the ruling class? Okay, dictatorship of proletariat. Fine, good. Yes, that's very important idea put forward that the working class has to revolt. The revolution needs to come. Can I say Marxism at its heart is always interested in social change. Marxism as a school of thought will say that class contradictions and class antagonism is the consistent part of how we live. क्लास कॉन्ट्राडिक्शन है बिकॉज हैव्स एंड हैव नॉट्स इनके इंटरेस्ट हमेशा ही ऑपोजिट है सो क्लास कॉन्ट्राडिक्शन एंड क्लास एंटेगनिज्म इज समथिंग विच इज अ रियलिटी ये हमारी जिंदगी की सच्चाई है क्लास कॉन्ट्राडिक्शन और क्लास एंटेगनिज्म एंड दैट इज व्हाई the have nots in the entire history what they have done is whenever the exploitation becomes too much sorry and the class consciousness emerges तो revolt कर लेते हैं so every system is prone to revolt and social change is integral to Marxism. Look at Marxism now from this lenses. What is Gramsci doing? Gramsci is trying to understand why the revolution has not come and how the revolution will come. Why do you want to bring the revolution? Because you are saying that in the society there is exploitation and what you need to do is you have to go for social change. करो बदलो change करो social change लाना जरूरी है. So social change is at the heart of Marxism and Marxists are saying the moment you are presenting this theory there is a demand coming, there is a support for the system, the policies are being made. Whenever the support comes down or the demands are changing, the system is going to use the feedback loop and is going to change the output. But the assumption is that the system is a stable system. What if we want to bring revolution? Where will you bring revolution? How will you bring revolution? Where is it coming in this system? Can the revolution come? Can social change happen? Because this system believes that the demand and the support which is coming, where is the demand and the support coming from? The demand and the support are coming from the people, from the social system which is there. Where is the social system? Social system is also existing along with political system. The assumption is that social system के अंदर जो भी चल रहा है यहाँ क्या चलता है यहाँ पे कास्ट इक्वेशंस चलेंगी क्लास इक्वेशंस चलेंगी रिलीजियस इक्वेशंस चलेंगी जेंडर इक्वेशंस चलेंगी all these things are going on in the society and they are constantly fighting with each other also. And if I want to bring changes for Dalits, for women, for let's say workers, I will have to change my here support and demand. I have to make a different demand. I have to say that I'm not happy with the way things are done, so the political system has to change. This aspect is not included in your analysis. How can you call your study as truly comparative? How can you call this study as including the informal structures which impact politics? The problem with traditional is traditional does not include this. Where is your study including all this analysis? You are still not including it. You can't say your approach is truly comparative. What are you doing, David Easton? You are creating a system which is scientific क्योंकि टर्मिनोलॉजी साइंटिफिक है इनपुट आउटपुट सिस्टम फीडबैक कोशिश की गई है यूनिवर्सल मॉडल बनाने की और यूनिवर्सली ये बात ट्रू भी है बट it is just a description. It is not going into deeper level analysis of why a demand will change or why a support will not be there for the system. You are not even telling why the support will not be there. For example, you're not talking about how, if people get to know that the consent is being manufactured, they will stop supporting the state. This part is not included. You assume that everything is hunky dory. Marxists are heavily critical of this model. They are saying you are presenting this model as something which is fixed. It is just a descriptive model which does not have any analysis of what is going on here. It is not even telling us how things are happening here. So, political system, executive, legislature, judiciary, bureaucracy, how they are constantly interacting with each other to present those policies or laws. ये किसने बताया? आपने तो बताया ही नहीं. तो इससे क्या हुआ? We are not happy. इससे ये हुआ, we are not happy with the way you are presenting your model. Just one criticism. This part I'll make you right. So coming back, what is systems approach? A system is created, inputs are there, outputs are there, feedback loop is there, and after this, what we have is a model called as systems, called as general systems theory or a systems approach in political science, basically devised for two purposes. One, to provide a universal model for comparing all the countries. We are not using the word state here. The word state is being replaced by political system. New terminology आ रही है, ठीक है? State word is replaced by political system. Okay, and one is to provide a universal model for comparison, and second is for providing a scientific model. Why? Modern approaches, they are all scientific in their orientation. They are all saying that we will not be making philosophical inquiries, we will not be going into history and telling you things, we will not restrict ourselves to institutions and the legal frameworks. What we'll do is we will be highly scientific in the way in which we work. And after Second World War, what you have is the science, the adoption of science and the scientific way of doing things, and the adoption of this systems approach by other disciplines, and they are able to produce theories which are relevant for the society. Political science is also trying to do the same thing. So you can compare it with the behavioral revolution which we have studied. Okay, so this is one thing. Now let's go into a little bit more detail of the systems approach. Okay, I'll read this for you. David Easton developed systems theory in the 1950s 60s as a general framework for analyzing political systems. He defined political system as responsible for authoritative allocation of values in the society. What are the components of this systems approach? One is political system as open system. The political system exists within and interacts with its environment. It is both influenced by and influences its surroundings. The system is adaptive and subject to continuous challenges called as stress. There is an input output framework. Inputs, they come from the environment. Now, what is this environment? This is the environment. Okay. This system is working in an environment in which, from where the inputs are coming. These inputs are of the nature of demands and support, requests for policies, services, or actions. Example, provide educational opportunities, make infrastructure, make wage laws. These are all demands by the people. Support, energy in the form of actions promoting the system. Example, I am paying you taxes, I am abiding by the laws, I am doing political participation. This shows the support for the system. This is the demand from the system. Once they are there, a conversion process happens. The black box. What is this black box? This black box is nothing but this. This is called as the black box. The black box where political authorities process inputs through decision making and policy formulation. And finally comes the outputs, policies, decisions, laws, regulations, resource allocation. And you have feedback mechanism. The effects and the consequences of outputs are fed back into the system as new inputs, creating a cyclical process. I hope this feedback is clear to you. The policies, laws, where will they get implemented? In the environment. Whether they are doing good, not, feedback will be taken. It will go here back. It will be feeded again to the system. System will make changes and the system will keep on working. So first is, core components include a political system, input-output framework, which includes the feedback mechanism, environmental influences, political, economic, social, technological factors from the environment will affect the political system's functioning. What is the meaning of this? The meaning is all these systems which we talked about, they are all a part of the environment in which this political system is working. So all of them are going to impact it in one way or the system. This is called as interaction with environment. Fine. The economy is going to impact, society is going to impact, international domain is also going to impact. Okay. Now we come to the main concepts. First is the concept of boundary. I already explained to you. Political systems have precise boundaries which separate them from their environment. Every political system has a boundary that separates it. Okay. For example, think of political system as a house. The inside is where the political decisions are made. Where is, where are all the political decisions made? All political decisions are made in political system. We call political system as state. State में ही सब कुछ होता है. तो political system, state, consider it the inside of a house where decisions are made. The outside is the society, public opinion, economy, culture. The walls of the house are the boundary. They don't completely block the outside, but they clearly show where the political system is located and how it interacts with the environment. So, the boundary of the political system basically is like a house. Within the house, you can say it's the political system. Outside the house, it is the other systems which are there of the environment. Fine. So there is a boundary. The concept is there is a boundary to the political system. Then, very important, systematic persistence. Despite stress, political system continues to persist. स्ट्रेस किस तरीके से आएगा, इसके लिए कैसे समझना है इसको? थिंक ऑफ अ ट्री. A tree may face some kind of a resistance when there are strong winds. If there are strong winds, the tree is going to face some resistance. But will the tree be uprooted? No. Probably the tree is going to adapt itself to the strong winds. टेढ़ा हो जाएगा शायद वो, ताकि विंड को, स्ट्रॉन्ग विंड्स को अडेप्ट करके खड़ा रह सके. पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम भी ऐसा है. पब्लिक प्रोटेस्ट हो सकते हैं, इकोनॉमिक प्रॉब्लम्स आ सकती हैं, लीडरशिप बदल सकती है, सोशल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स आ सकते हैं. दे आर ऑल स्ट्रेस which will come from here into the system, but the system is going to stay there. Okay, so this system has a boundary. This system is highly adaptable. It will adapt to various stresses which will be there in the environment. And now, very interestingly, it says this is why democracies and even authoritarian regimes systems survive, because the entire system is highly adaptive. ठीक है, तुम बहुत ज्यादा डिमांड करोगे तुम्हें कुछ मिल जाएगा. ठीक है, तुमने डिमांड किया एयर पोल्यूशन खत्म करो, कुछ कर दिया जाएगा जिससे तुम्हें लगेगा कि हाँ कुछ हो गया. अब वो सच में प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व हुई या नहीं, वी डोंट नो, बट द सिस्टम इज बिल्ट इन सच अ मैनर दैट दे विल come out with an output which will take care of these kinds of stress which are there. चाहे डेमोक्रेसी हो चाहे अथॉरिटेरियन रेजिम हो, दोनों इस तरीके को इंक्लूड करके चलते हैं. सेल्फ रेगुलेशन. सेल्फ रेगुलेशन में क्या होता है? गेट कीपिंग मैकेनिज्म्स होते हैं, कल्चरल नॉर्म्स होते हैं, कम्युनिकेशन चैनल्स होते हैं। क्या मतलब है? देखो, पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम्स हैव इंटरनल मैकेनिज्म्स जिनका काम है टू कंट्रोल, फिल्टर एंड मैनेज द इनपुट. They prevent the system from being overloaded and help in maintaining stability. What is the meaning of this? Look, this is something like, try to understand. Marxists will say state will wither away. State की जरूरत नहीं है. State को हटा दो. Gandhi will say state is incompatible with the idea of Swaraj. There should be no state. State as an institution or any authority. क्या तुमने कोई ऐसा देश देखा जिसमें स्टेट ना हो? स्टेट तो होती है. वो स्टेट क्या है? पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम है इस टर्मिनोलॉजी में. वो अपने आप को अडेप्ट भी करता है और वो कुछ तरीके ऐसे बना के रखता है जिससे वो चलता रहेगा. वहां पर आती है बात सेल्फ रेगुलेशन की. आई विल क्रिएट थिंग्स विच इंश्योर दैट द स्टेट कंटिन्यूज. कभी ऐसा नहीं होगा कि स्टेट खत्म हो जाएगी. जिसमें आते हैं गेट कीपिंग मैकेनिज्म्स, पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज, ब्यूरोक्रेसी, मीडिया, कोर्ट्स, कल्चरल नॉर्म्स. यू हैव टू रिस्पेक्ट द लॉ. देयर हैज टू बी टॉलरेंस इन पॉलिटिकल स्फीयर. Communication channels, elections, public hearings, interest groups. Let me take an illustration for you. As of now, what we have said is this political system has a boundary, just like you are in a house. Within the house and outside the house, there is a boundary. There is a boundary to this system also. It will keep on functioning. इसके अंदर बहुत सारे लोग बैठे हैं, executive, legislature, judiciary, bureaucracy. They are having a boundary with the outside environment. What is this outside environment? In a country, this is the outside environment, okay, where other systems are operating. This system is adaptable like a tree which is going to sustain the high winds, and this system is like a security checkpoint. Security checkpoint पे क्या होता है? Security checkpoint पे only those people are allowed who have the ticket. Let's think of a security checkpoint at an airport. Those people who have the ticket are allowed. Those people who are not outrightly banned, they can travel. Those people who are not carrying any hazardous substances, they can fly or they can take the train. कुछ भी मान लो. ये क्या है? हैजार्डस सब्सटेंस नहीं लेके जा सकते. ट्रेन की टिकट होनी चाहिए या प्लेन की टिकट होनी चाहिए. कहीं तुम वांटेड क्रिमिनल तो नहीं हो तो जा ही नहीं सकते. रणवीर अलाहाबादिया बेचारा जा ही नहीं सकता था फॉर सर्टेन टाइम बिकॉज कोर्ट ने मना कर दिया था. So not a criminal, but let's say there was a case pending against him. Just like a security checkpoint, the political system is also not going to let every demand enter. Only the legitimate demands will enter. If you are making any arbitrary demand to the system, लोग इकट्ठे कर लो, डिमांड करो आर्बिट्रेरी, लोग तो इकट्ठे हो जाएंगे. People can be mobilized on the basis of caste, religion, whatever be the case, and you make a demand on the system. Will the system accept the demand also? No. Why? The system is self-regulating. The system is saying, you make a demand on me. How you will make a demand on me? Create a political party, get votes, come and sit in my framework, and then make policies. But all the political parties who are formed in India, they have to give an undertaking to the Election Commission of India that they will abide by the Constitution of India. तुम इंडिया के कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के अगेंस्ट जाकर एक पार्टी बनाकर हरकतें करने लग जाओगे, हो ही नहीं सकता है. इलेक्शन ही नहीं लड़ सकते, बाकी छोड़ो. Every system is going to regulate itself like a security checkpoint, and it is going to keep on functioning. That's a part of the theory. You have a system, you have demand and supports, you have outputs, The system has a boundary, the system is highly adaptive, the system is self-regulating. So what is happening? This is how things are working in all parts of the world. A generalized statement given by David Easton. Are you able to understand this? Any problems at this point of time? These are called as gatekeeping mechanisms. Political parties, bureaucracy, ये काम करते हैं. कल्चरल नॉर्म्स बनाए जाएंगे, रिस्पेक्ट, लॉ की रिस्पेक्ट करो, पॉलिटिकल लेवल पे टॉलरेंस भी रखो, ठीक है. ये सब एक सिस्टम का पार्ट है, पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम का, इन एवरी कंट्री. ओके, सम प्लेसेस there will be concentration of power, some places there may not be, some will be democracy, some will be authoritarian regimes, but every system will have a self-regulating mechanism. Every system will persist because it is highly adaptive. Every system will have a boundary through which it can clearly identify how it is interacting with other systems, and that is how खेला होबे चल रहा है खेल. ठीक है, ये है हमारी डेविड ईस्टन की सिस्टम्स अप्रोच. नाउ understanding this in detail is very important because the second approach is also related to this approach, which is the structural functional approach, which we'll not do today, don't worry. But yes, once this approach has come, the main significance is the universal application, and the second is this is scientific and empirical in nature. क्यों बनानी है तुमको scientific empirical? Because they are saying political science बेचारा पीछे रह गया, political science scientific नहीं बन पा रहा, so let's make the study of political science also scientific. तो क्या करते हैं, ये उल्टी सीधी चीजें लेकर आ जाते हैं. Now this is the job of behavioralists. This is the job of those people who want to make the discipline scientific in nature. That is why they are doing all these things. Those scholars who say all this is not needed, इसकी जगह चुपचाप स्टेट की बात करो, चुपचाप एग्जीक्यूटिव लेजिस्लेचर जुडिशरी की बात करो, हम उनको बोलेंगे ट्रेडिशनलिस्ट्स. These are the behavioralists, the people who don't subscribe to this and who subscribe to the older way in which the subject has to be studied. They will be called as traditionalists, and traditionalists and behavioralists, they will keep on fighting. ठीक है. The main argument of traditionalist is that okay, you have created this, you are saying it has universal application, you are saying this is scientific, very well and good, but the problem is your framework does not have depth. It is not telling me how caste is impacting politics. We have done how caste impacts politics. We have done how in India caste became a basis for political mobilization, as a result of which political parties came and they occupied power and they are making caste-based appeal. Where is all these analysis? There is no such analysis. You are not telling us what is the definition of justice. Is justice functional specialization as said by Plato, or is justice distributive in nature as suggested by Aristotle, treating unequals unequally, or is justice as suggested by John Rawls fairness, or is justice as suggested by utilitarians greatest happiness of greatest number? You are not telling us things which really matter. All you are doing is you are providing a descriptive tool which is describing how things are happening, but in political science it is more important than how things are happening. It is more important to tell that why things are happening and what things should happen instead of how things are happening. How बताता है हो कैसे रहा है. जितनी भी साइंटिफिक स्टडी होगी वो फोकस किस पे करती है. Remember the normative and the empirical approaches which we have done earlier. Are you focusing on what is? Are you focusing on what ought to be? So the traditionalists are saying this is what is the real deal. What the behavioralists are saying is we are focusing on what is. What is always descriptive, whereas what ought to be is always analytical. तो ट्रेडिशनलिस्ट आके क्या कहेगा, सिस्टम्स अप्रोच डेविड ईस्टन तुमने बना दी, ये है क्या, ये तो डिस्क्रिप्टिव टूल है, ये तो व्हाट इज बता रहा है. ज्यादा जरूरी क्या है, व्हाट ऑट टू बी वो तो बता ही नहीं रहा, एनालिटिकल तो है ही नहीं, बता ही नहीं रहा जस्टिस क्या होता है. It is not telling how the society interacts with the political system, how the caste impacts politics, how the religion impacts politics. These are more important questions in political science. So this is a big criticism against the theory. Limited explanatory and predictive power. You don't have enough juice in your model. Second, it is abstract and mechanistic. Empty vision of politics. या बेटर बताता हूं तुमको, ये स्टेटमेंट रीड करो मेरे साथ. ये मॉडल तो बना दिया. The model hides the actual human fights and negotiations involved in making decisions. So we don't really see what the leaders or decision makers are doing. That means what happens here? यहाँ पे कैसे डिसीजन होते हैं बताया ही नहीं. दिस इज मोर इम्पोर्टेंट कि एक तरफ सरकार एक तरफ ऑपोजिशन लेजिस्लेचर में कैसे भिड़ रहे हैं. यू टेल अस दिस. दिस इज मोर इम्पोर्टेंट. What is the viewpoint of BJP? What is the viewpoint of Indian National Congress? These things are not being discussed. So the model is not analytical, does not have depth, is not telling us the intricacies which we want to know to understand the political phenomena better. तो फिर क्या है मॉडल? कुछ नहीं है. मॉडल डिस्क्रिप्टिव है, मॉडल में जार्गन है नहीं. मॉडल साइंटिफिक जरूर है, बट साइंटिफिक होने का मतलब रेलेवेंट होना, ये दोनों अलग अलग चीजें. सो ट्रेडिशनलिस्ट दे आर हेवीली क्रिटिकल. So one is the criticism of this entire model which comes from the traditionalists. The other is that which comes from Marxists. Evaluation of systems approach. Now, when we look at systems approach, the evaluation part, if you see here, one, it is universal model. Second, it is empirical and scientific. Those are the positives. The negatives, which is the criticism, from the perspective of traditionalists, it lacks analytical power, is merely descriptive, does not indulge in critical inquiry, ये कुछ भी नहीं करता है. Okay, introduces unnecessary jargon. Here we can introduce a thinker also. यहाँ पर Paul Kress, he has described Eastern's model as empty vision of politics. कुछ भी नहीं है, ऐसे ही स्टूडेंट्स को कंफ्यूज कर दिया है. Then the second criticism is by Marxists, who are saying approach is status quoist and defense of liberal system. Now why they are saying it is a defense of liberal system? ले दे के Marxists दो बातें कर लेते हैं. एक, everything is related to economy. Second, it's a defense of liberalism को support है. They are not wrong. Why? Because the entire model does not have any mechanism to assess the conditions for revolt, whether how the revolt will come, what are the factors on which revolutions or revolt come, what are the exploitation in the system? There is nowhere this kind of a calculation being done. So that is why it is status quoist. It basically portrays a very stable system which has been made by the liberal society. That is what it does. Marxist critics argue that the system's approach is inherently conservative because its central concern is system maintenance and how the system copes up with stress to maintain equilibrium. By prioritizing survival and stability of the system, it minimizes the role and importance of radical change, revolution, civil unrest, and fundamental structural reforms. The model is built on the reality of stable Western liberal democracies and reinforces the existing political order rather than providing tools to analyze the injustice. तो क्या कर रहा है ये टूल? क्या बताता है? ये आपने पूरा थ्योरी बना दी, थ्योरी में लिख दिया इसकी बाउंड्री है, it is highly adaptable, it is self regulating. They are saying the entire way in which the model is devised is to show us that the system is stable. सिस्टम बदला नहीं जा रहा है, सिस्टम बदलने की बातें ही नहीं है कहीं पर. एंड दैट इज व्हाई आई टोल्ड यू अर्लियर आल्सो, फॉर मार्क्सिस्ट्स सोशल चेंज कैसे आएगा? बिकॉज देयर आर इनजस्टिसेस एवरीवेयर इन द सोसाइटी. यहां पर भी इनजस्टिस होगा, यहां पर भी हो रहा होगा. We don't have any way to understand what is happening. So, what's the point of having this kind of a model? Is it adding anything new to our understanding of political science, the working of state, the politics? It is not adding anything. It is just describing how things happen. And that also in a very limited capacity. It has limited analytical. एनालिटिकल समझते हो ना? उसने कैसे इंपैक्ट किया, यूएस के प्रेसिडेंट ने ऐसा बयान क्यों दिया, तो ये सब आपके मॉडल से कहीं से भी नहीं बता सकता. सो दैट इज व्हाई देयर इज अ बिग प्रॉब्लम विद द मॉडल. एंड आपको सवाल कैसे आएगा? यू विल बी आस्क्ड टू एक्सप्लेन द मॉडल एंड यू विल बी आस्क्ड टू एग्जामिन द मॉडल. दोनों क्वेश्चन आएंगे आपको. In the explanation of the model, you will have to draw this. Also, you will have to talk about how the system has the characteristics of the system, political system, boundary, persistence, self-regulation, input-output, feedback, सब explain करना पड़ेगा. And उसके बाद evaluation में आपको positives बताने हैं और आपको negatives बताने हैं. ठीक है? Done. So that is it for today. We have started with the comparative politics. I am not going into the details of traditional approaches. They don't ask questions on traditional approaches क्या होती हैं. Plus, why I'm not going here is because earlier also, while doing behavioralism, we talked about this. And while doing thinkers like Plato, Machiavelli, we have already done all these approaches in quite detail. However, what I have done is, I have in a very, very structured manner included all these approaches here, such that what is the approach all about? What is the what are the thinkers which are associated? What are the main ideas? For example, philosophical approach, key features, limitations. Okay, major thinkers, all are included here for you to read. But again, the expectation that they are going to ask you to explain the philosophical approach, which is traditional in nature, वैसे क्वेश्चंस अब नहीं आते हैं. हाँ, क्वेश्चंस कहां से आते हैं? या आपसे पूछा जाएगा डिफरेंस. तो एक काम करते हैं, आज क्वेश्चन भी लिखते हैं. आफ्टर दिस एंटायर लेक्चर you should be able to attempt this question. Difference between comparative government and comparative politics. You can expect this question. You can expect a question on limitations. Okay, what are traditional approaches? And what are the limitations of this approach? Then third question you can expect is reasons for emergence of modern approaches. Then you can expect a question on systems approach, explanation and evaluation. Okay. Before tomorrow's class, try to find the answers of all these four questions. Okay. Fine. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's meet tomorrow. We will continue with our study. Tomorrow, we will see the structural functional approach and we will see other approaches and we will continue with our journey of comparative politics. I hope the lecture was fruitful for you and I'll upload the draft value addition material for you to go and read. And as and when the entire material is ready, I'll remove the draft portion from the portal and I'll upload the full-fledged ones. Okay. Uh, Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's meet tomorrow. All the very best until then.